Good morning to you. Thank you so much for finding time to be with us today. 5 minutes past 10 a.m. here in Nairobi, East African time. I trust that your day has started off well, and for those who are already awake on in their day, a very good afternoon, good evening, and I trust that you are okay today, the 28th of March 2023, and here the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa. We start with the newspapers from Kenya. The Standard newspaper, the main headline: Kenyatta's under siege, hundreds of youth, some ferried from an unknown place, invaded the city farm belonging to former President Uhuru Kenyatta's family, hewing down eucalyptus trees and carting away sheep. In the evening, they lit fires on the farm, but there was no police presence. Our story is on page 6 and 7. CASS assume office in spite of court order. You'll find that on page 12. Eat chicken feet, Egyptians told as living costs rise. What were they doing with this feet initially? I guess that's what we do here in Africa. It's a delicacy, I hear, in some cultures. And what next for Tottenham after Conte exit? That you'll find on the sport page on the Standard newspaper on page 40. KQ slumps to record 38.5 billion loss. All right, now KQ is just something else. And the main pictorial on the Standard newspaper, of course, the upper one, of our former President Uhuru Kenyatta's farm being raided, and down there Raila mass action leaves city in paralysis. So there's a photo of that too. The Star newspaper: Uhuru farm spectre raided in demo twist. In Migori, too short after protesters storm police station to demand release of colleagues. That is on page 4 and 5. Germany rolls out red carpet for Ruto. All right, and then MPs in fresh bid for fat pension packs. No ways. But that story is on page 6. And then Maxim Wahome and families now the worst of enemies. And drought leaves trail of death in Turkana, All right, so the Daily Nation: stop this madness. Down a slippery path. A man was shot dead by police in Kisumu and several people were injured on the second Monday of protest in which property of unknown value was looted and destroyed, properties belonging to the families of former President Uhuru Kenyatta and Azimio leader Raila Odinga were targeted for attack with machete-wielding gangs driving away animals and setting a tree plantation on fire at the Kenyatta's Northland City estate. You'll find that coverage from page 2 to 6 on the Daily Nation. Falling fortunes as KQ records 38 billion Kenya shillings of loss. And of course, the main pictorial there are the scenes from yesterday's protest. And so we'll just leave that over there. But, I'll just reiterate that headline on the Daily Nation. Yeah, stop that madness. It's really unnecessary. And that we might get ourselves into a place where it will be very difficult to come out of. So I think level-headedness at this point should prevail in this country, because we keep going the way we are going. The price tag of anarchy and conflict is way too high, and we can't afford that. All right, the Citizen from Tanzania: why disclosure of extractive deals is in the pipeline. Aviation performance surpasses pre-COVID levels. Tanzania is doing so well. What Harris' visit to Tanzania means for ties. Remember, Kamala Harris was in Ghana and she's headed to Tanzania. I'll bring you more about her visit to Ghana yesterday and what she said there and some of the agreements that they entered with Ghana, led by President Kofu. There, I'll let you know in just a bit. The Daily Monitor: this is from Uganda. Cabinet wrong on wetlands, KCCA. And then Newsday from Zimbabwe: this one, ZANU-PF withholds election results. And then the Herald: deal decisively with cases of corruption and drug abuse. The Daily Trust from Nigeria: accused persist as Nigerians hoard Naira notes. What? PDP crisis: court restrains IU from parading self as national chairman. Very well. The Nation from Nigeria as well: court order restraining IU deepens PDP's post-poll crisis. The Daily Times: Cyclone Freddy brought a drought take toll. That I think must be from Malawi. this morning. Yes, because I can see ADMAC needs 123.3 billion kwacha, that is Malawian currency. So that is from Malawi, the Daily Times. The Nation from, I guess this is from Nigeria now. Passports books out of stock, immigration suspends new application. Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to see where this is from. No, it is from Malawi. It is from Malawi. I've seen the price there. The Nation also from Malawi. So today we do have some newspapers that we've not heard before. So good job to our team. Now the Daily Telegraph from the UK. Retiring early is to blame for higher rates. And I'll resurrect Sturgeon's transreform, says Yusuf. All right, The Guardian, Doreen Lawrence, I was betrayed by the Daily Mail. And the Daily Express, Prime Minister, I'll fight every day for our precious union. The Daily Mail, crackdown on nuisance, Airbnb party houses. After 10 years, it is all over for Trini and Sachi. That also is there. And then iNews, SNP Tamil delays dream of independent Scotland. And then the Metro, Winner Yusuf plans sudden new pour, stop the boats. Okay, so that is what we have in some of those newspapers from across the continent and others from outside. So now let's look at a bit of some sports news before I bring you the weather update. I've become your weather lady, so anyway, the sports news, as it has been covered by some of the newspapers from Kenya. From the back page on the Star newspaper, time for action, skipper Olunga counts on Iran friendly to jumpstart Harambee Stars, and KPA's progress elates coach Kiki. Perfect chance for juniors. I think that is the Uganda-born Junior Foundation golf team with head coach John Van. All right, so there are 7 youngsters selected for All African Junior Team Champions on the golf tournament. And can champions Nairobi Water Queens maintain their 10-year unbeaten run? That is on, is it volleyball or something? And then 3 Lions jewels. Saka confirms his importance with superb display against Ukraine. All right. And then Bayern remain in unrest after Nagelsmann exit. That we have there. And then McGrath, Wary, Hong Kong, Singapore key for Shuja's survival in World Series. Shuja is our national team for the rugby sevens, and so that is there as well. Let me see what other papers have in the sports page. The Standard newspaper, on the back page of the Standard newspaper, who should be Tottenham's long-term successor? The Italian's assistant Stellini has been appointed acting head coach. Tottenham and unhappy relationship with their manager Conte. All right, so I guess they've been, and they have a couple of names that have been suggested there that could take on after the manager left. And some EPL news, Foden to miss Liverpool game. And smiling Saka lights up England's side. England's Bukayo Saka celebrates after scoring in a past match there. Okay, and then Chelsea post 19 billion loss. 19 billion Kenya shillings, not sterling pound, Kenya shillings loss. So that is equivalent to about, is it 121.3 million pounds, and also equivalent to 148.65 US dollars. So that is what they have lost. Extraordinary expenses and loss of revenue after sanctions were imposed on previous owner Roman Abramovich. The Premier League club yesterday said Russian owner Abramovich put the club up for sale in early March last year following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. UK government sanctions on Abramovich has also complicated the sale process. So Abramovich and others, especially the oligarchs, have been the collateral damage, and they've been affected, their businesses and their interests across the world. So because of that, who's the owner of Chelsea, Chelsea's football team has really recorded some losses because of that. Well, Right, so that is what we have on the standard newspaper. On the Daily Nation, let me see if we can talk about it. After slaying fours in Nyamira, Rugby Kings Gekano match on. That's another story on. And then the great Kipchoge just keeps going, world marathon record holder and two-time Olympic champion Eliud Kipchoge is not done yet. The first man to run a sub-2-hour unofficial marathon, the 39-year-old. Next stop is in Boston, where he hopes to win his 5th title in the 6th race World Marathon Majors Series. And your guess is as good as mine. After finishing the job in Boston on April 17th, he will be on the streets of the Big Apple, that is New York, on November 5th, tackling the 5 New York boroughs to complete the inevitable at Central Park. He not only wants to compete, but to win all 6 World Marathon Majors Series races that take elite runners through Tokyo, London, Chicago, Berlin, Boston, and New York Marathon. So good luck there to our very able World Marathon holder. Eliud. That's Eliud Kipchoge for you right there. I think he's our national treasure here. It's just we don't know how to appreciate our heroes, but he's celebrated worldwide. All right, very well. So let's see what we have on the weather today, how the conditions are said to be across just a few cities and towns across Africa. Johannesburg, it is going to be mostly cloudy with highs of 21 degrees Celsius and lows of 13 degrees Celsius. Nairobi, 25 degrees Celsius on the high side and lows of 17 degrees Celsius, and it's going to be mostly cloudy today. Accra, partly cloudy with highs of 32 degrees Celsius and lows of 26 degrees Celsius. In Dakar, highs of 26 degrees Celsius and lows of 21 degrees Celsius. It's going to be mostly clear. In Abuja, highs of 39 degrees Celsius and lows of 23 degrees Celsius. It's going to be mostly very sunny there. In Abuja and Kinshasa, mostly sunny with mostly cloudy with highs of 31 degrees Celsius and lows of 22 degrees Celsius. In Luanda, lows of 24 degrees Celsius and highs of 29 degrees Celsius, and it's going to be mostly cloudy there. And in Khartoum, 35 degrees Celsius on the high side, and the low side is going to be 19 degrees Celsius, and it's going to be partly cloudy as well there. In Addis Ababa also is going to be partly cloudy with highs of 21 degrees Celsius and lows of 12 degrees Celsius. So that is your weather condition in just a handful of African cities. Those are cities, right? And anyway, they're capital cities, right? So you're now up to date. I hope that was helpful. So now you can be ready. I'll be prepared, dress appropriately, whatever you need to do to make sure that you enjoy whatever weather you have in your country or in your city today. Very well, let's get into the latest news. And Paul Rusesabagina, who was portrayed as a hero in the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda, muted by presidential order. According to a government spokesperson, it followed years of diplomatic pressure by the U.S., where Mr. Rusesabagina had lived since 2009. Mr. Rusesabagina is accredited for saving some 1,200 people during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. So perhaps what we're going to look at this morning, very shortly, and then we move on to another story, because I think I did spend a good amount of time yesterday, talking about this story and just giving us a background history and just, reconciling what really happened during the genocide in 1994 and what landed Rusesabagina in trouble, if at all. Now, I think, but what is really standing out here is the role of Qatar as the peace mediator, and I think I did also talk about it yesterday. So he is in Qatar now, and he'll be joining his family in the U.S. as soon as his request, was approved. He was released from prison on Friday. After negotiations brokered by Doha, and is believed to be hosted right now by Qatari representatives. He is in Qatar right now. So he's a former hotel manager who was portrayed as a hero in the Hollywood film Hotel Rwanda and was sentenced to 25 years for terrorism by Rwandan court in what supporters, of course, have called a trial, a sham trial. We followed that trial, and truly, even how it went on there, it was very suspect. So in 2020, he was tricked to going to Rwanda in a private jet, thinking he was heading to a neighboring Burundi. On Friday, Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari said on Twitter that the procedure for his transfer to Qatar was underway, where Mr. Rusesabagina will head to the US. And as I have said, he's already in Qatar, so he's heading to the US probably right now as we speak. And on Tuesday last week, Rwanda's President Paul Kagame was in Doha, where he met Qatar's ruler Amin Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani. Mr. Rusesabagina was released just 3 days later. The US has long demanded Mr. Rusesabagina's release, but Washington hasn't been on very good terms with Rwanda for its views on the government's human rights record. Okay, for Washington, Qatar, which is a long-time US partner, house, but also a very close and big investor in Rwanda's aviation sector, was a good way to go about it. All right, so they're saying, Qatar, because you seem to be having a good relationship with President Paul Kagame, so maybe you will be our spokesperson in this, and just you can call a truce, you can mediate, and Qatar was successful, obviously, in this regard. So in 2019, Qatar agreed to invest 60% in the $1.3 billion US project to build the biggest airport in East Africa in Bugesera, some 40 kilometers southeast of Kigali. So Qatar is such a huge investor in Rwanda, and that's why its position and what it says and its relationship with Rwanda really matters to President Paul Kagame, and that's why President Paul Kagame has a proclivity to listening to what perhaps Qatar has to say because of the interest it has. And as I have mentioned there, Washington is not in very good terms with President Paul Kagame. It's been calling out President Paul Kagame one in this conflict, not invasion, that is what, but also it is an invasion by M23 into Rwanda. Into the Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course the US and France and some other countries have come out to condemn Rwanda and the role it's playing, allegedly supporting this M23. So that has really severed the relationship between Rwanda and the US further. So, and then President Paul Kagame is just not a fan of the US talking to or lecturing Africa about this human rights, because that is one of the key things that has really made there to be a wedge between the US and President Paul Kagame or Rwanda. And to some large extent, I can truly understand where President Paul Kagame is coming from. As much as there are things that happen in Rwanda that really are wanting as far as the rule of law and the constitution and human rights and democracy, there is a gap and there is a deficit that definitely might not augur well with countries that champion for, free space and certain freedoms that to be enjoyed according to the constitution. So we've seen Paul Kagame really coming hard on even opposition figures. Some of them are serving jail time. And if you want to run as a presidential candidate against Paul Kagame in Rwanda, then you have to present your credentials to him. And the government has to decide, okay, so we see you want to run against me, and let me see how I think about it, and I'll let you know if you qualify or not. Basically, that is what happens in Rwanda. So there's no democracy as we know it around the world, or as we struggle to practice it even here in the continent. So that has been a huge bone of contention. But the point, and up to that point, I think we have every right to criticize what is happening in Rwanda in regards to that. But where Paul Kagame usually has a problem with is the US and its insistence and some of these virtues, all the things that it stands for, as a champion for human rights, as a champion for democratic practices, as a champion for these, strong institutions and everything else, and yada, 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 all these wonderful things these liberals talk to us about. But you realize they are supporting and have a very cordial relationship with, say, a country like Saudi Arabia, which has been accused of tremendous abuse of human rights in countries in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is involved for a long time in the war in Yemen because of the issues it has had with Iran. So each side is supporting one side of the divide. I'm not getting into the details of that. And other areas, I mean, Saudi Arabia literally turned a whole human being into minced meat in one of their embassies in Turkey. And, and even the Mohammed bin Salman, is that his name, his second name? Yeah, he came out and he actually, he did confess that actually Saudi Arabia is responsible for the killing of this Khashoggi. So this is a country that even in its own space, women don't have the right even to drive. I think he announced some of these reforms and the rest of the world was very happy about it. But we haven't seen that practically being achieved in Saudi Arabia. There's still some freedoms that people are not allowed. So President Paul Kagame usually, I think, calls out this hypocrisy that I keep calling out here. You can't be telling us about human rights, about democracy, about whatever else that you stand for and you're pushing for the rest of the world to embrace, while you don't have a problem having a relationship with a country like that also has very poor records on human rights. You don't have a problem of supporting and having a relationship with President Paul Biya of Cameroon, who has been in power for so many years, the second longest serving president in Africa, and you have diplomatic relations and working relations with Cameroon. You can't talk to us about human rights while leading U.S. companies were the ones who have been drilling and taking advantage of the wealth and working with a dictator that is Obiang in Equatorial Guinea, and you don't have a problem. I gave us a whole history in what happened in Equatorial Guinea after President Obiang even took over the leadership of the central bank. And immediately he did that, the next day, him and his family opened about 60 bank accounts in a U.S. bank. That was not even flagged. But like, how do one family or what people who are associated come and open a whole over 60 bank accounts, and you don't see this as a red flag, but you enable? So they, on one hand, they enable bad leadership, they enable dictatorship, they enable all these things that they claim to fight, but want to hold others accountable. So it is this kind of hypocrisy that I think does not gel well with President Paul Kagame. So every now and then they are at loggerheads, and I think Paul Kagame feels you can't, you don't have the moral authority to now talk to us about how Rwandans need to run their democracy and how Rwandans need to elect their leaders and how Rwandans need to uphold the human rights records or whatever it is that you are saying we have a deficit on. So that has been a point of departure between Rwanda and the US. And I think on one extreme, I can see President Paul Kagame's stand on one extreme, because I don't entirely agree with what happens in Rwanda. But give it to the man. He's been able to stabilize that country. I was telling us here yesterday, if this was just some random country somewhere around Africa, and we see how there are countries who have experienced civil wars and have not been able to get out of it, but Paul Kagame has been able to really stabilize Rwanda. So as much as the things that perhaps still needs working on, and democratic space that still the country needs to work on, and whatever it is that is lacking there, but he's done a good job in uniting and just moving Rwanda forward, and with the help of these countries from abroad. So it had been, because Paul Rusesabagina was given the U.S. Nationality in 2009. He's been in the U.S. since then. And so Washington could not get through to President Paul Kagame. So they had to use Doha, which Qatar are very good friends, and they have a good diplomatic relations, and is a strategic partner in the Middle East, especially right now that Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Salman, I think, is slowly turning, and because Saudi Arabia has had a good relationship with the U.S., but they're slowly turning to be extremely very friendly with China, and that is something that is bothering the United States. So the United States is just trying to build stronger ties with its allies now, and Qatar is one of them in the Middle East. I think it's very important for the U.S. to have that. So they used Qatar to talk to President Paul Kagame for the release of Paul Rusesabagina, and that seems to have been successful. And that, as I have mentioned, Qatar is a huge investor in Rwanda, so I think it matters. And the same way that Qatar has been able to prevail upon Paul Kagame to release Paul Rusesabagina, I have a feeling that perhaps Qatar might also prevail on President Paul Kagame to make some concessions when it comes to the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But I don't think Paul Kagame will be willing to admit some of these allegations that have been leveled against him. He says, Rwanda is not involved in what is happening in the DRC, so I don't know if he'll be able to swallow that humble pie, or whatever role that perhaps Rwanda is playing in this conflict, if at all he's willing to make some concessions and see if at all he can aid in ending this unnecessary conflict. But I have a feeling that maybe Qatar might be able to prevail Paul Kagame, and that is because of the ties they have and what Rwanda's relationship with Qatar means, and especially to Rwanda in this case, because what is Qatar getting from Rwanda? Maybe not so much, but Rwanda is getting so much in terms of investment. As I've mentioned there, in 2019, Qatar agreed to invest 60% in the $1.3 billion project to build the biggest airport in East Africa in Bugesera, some 40 kilometers away from Kigali. So see, and the following year, Qatar Airways bought 49% of the Rwandan state-owned carrier Rwandan Air. 49%, Qatar owns that. So you see, that's a very close partnership for a country to own almost half of your shares of your national carrier. That's a big deal, and maybe that's why Rwanda Air has been doing well and has been expanding even in the region. So it is a big deal. So the relationship between Rwanda and Qatar especially matters so much for Rwanda, maybe than it does to Qatar, but also for Qatar, I'm sure, they're benefiting from this relationship, and that is why it is important, even when Qatar tried to call a meeting earlier in the year between President Paul Kagame and Felix Tshisekedi, and Felix Tshisekedi did not go. That is because he said, yes, now it makes sense. He said that he does not trust Qatar as a peace guarantor, because Qatar, and now we see because of the interest it has in Rwanda, this termed Qatar as being biased, not a neutral, not a neutral person in this conflict. And so that is one of the reasons that was cited by President Paul Tshisekedi, not Paul Tshisekedi, Felix Tshisekedi, okay? But from the explanation I've given and from the investment that Qatar has made in Rwanda, of course, yeah, I think it's you can easily come to that conclusion that Qatar, when perhaps it might be forced to choose sides, it might as well just side with Rwanda based on the kind of relationship they have in terms of investment. And I think that is what liberals push for. Liberals push for a world that is brought together by cooperation and just working together. And the argument that counters the argument of the realists, people who believe that the world is anarchic and every state should just work on, accumulating more power to protect itself within the international system, because the international system is full of anarchy and there's no central power and there's no police, to enforce these rules like you have in a country and things like that. And so they advocate for a country to just go and protect its own interest and fight for it, whichever means and ways you have to achieve that, you achieve that. But the liberals, one of the key foundations that advances this ideology, or the leaders that choose to lead in this manner, is the importance of cooperation. So what they say is, when you cooperate together through trade deals, through diplomatic relations, through exchange exchange of cultural activities and all that, through this dollar diplomacy that we see at play right now, through all these other means, but you cooperate together, then the chances of you thinking of attacking another country, and that's why the US, as much as all Russia for that matter, as much as they had a long history of this Cold War that I think now has restarted again. I think it never ended. Cold War went on and for 40 years until USSR was broken off in the early 90s, late 80s. It had gone for since the end of World War II until that point. But I think those undertones never went away, and now we're just seeing that at play right now. Except in this point, there is an actual aggression that is ongoing, that is, Russia to Ukraine. But you see, the other countries are really hesitant. They just can't come in and start attacking physically because of this cooperation that the liberals talk about. They need each other. Whichever way, Europe cannot detach itself from Russia. It needs the gas, it needs the oil, it needs what Russia has to offer to that region, and vice versa. The US and China, as much as they have all these trade tariffs and problems and things that have been ongoing and these power struggles, but they realize you still have majority of the US companies having their products being manufactured in China, and all that. And that is because it's easier for and cheaper for it to be manufactured in China than being manufactured, say, in a place like the US. So it is this kind of codependency and cooperation in the international system that forces now states to act in a certain way. So I think in this regard, the liberals might be right, because if you keep cooperating and you keep working together and you create a need for each other, then you realize maybe this will lessen. The idea is this cooperation will lessen the chances of conflict happening or aggression happening, because you realize if I go attacking this country, then that means my country will also suffer. So for the best interest of my country, then it is good then, therefore, that I advance peace and I advance cooperation so that I don't get to suffer. Okay? So that is what this is, and that is what I'm saying all this to say that because of the investments that Qatar has in Rwanda, that's why what Qatar has to say really matters for Rwanda, and that just brings out the advantages of cooperation or codependency, if you call it, or interdependency. It is interdependency in the international system, so it's important. It's easier to prevail upon. It's easier for Qatar to prevail upon Rwanda. So I'm hoping that it will be able to prevail on Rwanda on other issues as well, especially in the conflict in the DRC. But I think there's also another person that someone else needs to prevail upon, and that is the president of the DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, and that other FDLR. Yesterday I was telling you here that the East African forces who are in DRC, and they went there with a certain mandate that was not very clear. But I think one of the stands and a point of departure for them and the presidency in DRC is, I think, the approach in which they want to take on this conflict and what the DRC's government want them to do. The ERC force is saying if we are to go after a rebel group, be it M23, then we will go after all the rebel groups, including the FDLR. And the government of DRC is not in agreement with that. They just want these forces from East Africa to fight the M23. These forces from East Africa to fight his problem with the Rwandan president. That's what he wants us to do. So we will get ourselves into a lot of trouble and a lot of other diplomatic fallouts that we might not be able to contain in the East Africa Community region. And so perhaps we need another person to prevail upon President Paul Kagame, not Paul Kagame, Felix Tshisekedi, even as Qatar prevails upon President Paul Kagame. But at the end of the day, Qatar, what do you stand to gain? What's the interest? I can see you have a lot of investment in Rwanda, so obviously you have your interests there to protect. But what else? There's always something else that is quite interesting. So that is the role Qatar Qatar played in release of Paul Rusesabagina from prison, and he's already in Qatar, and he's on his way to the United States, and he should be reunited with his family very soon. And this is what United Nations Security Council Coordinator John Kirby is quoted as saying, that I can confirm that Paul Rusesabagina has left Rwanda and is currently in Doha. He will soon be making his way back to the United States, and his family is, and as I am sure no one is surprised, they'll be eager to welcome him back here at home. So that is that. Okay, so Kata, I guess that's a kudos for you. That's another plus. Yeah. So you prevail upon President Paul Kagame with, in other issues as well. Now, there's a story I read yesterday in the afternoon, but I did not get a chance to get into the details of that, and that is the appointment of TPLF's spokesperson into the government by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in Ethiopia. And Ethiopia's Prime Minister has appointed the spokesperson of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front as the head of an interim administration in the Tigray region. The appointment is the latest sign of progress in the peace deal that ended the 2-year war between the government and the TPLF last November. Getachew Reda's appointment was announced in a Twitter message from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's office. This happened, by the way, on Thursday, but I thought it was very important because on Friday we did a Twitter space and we talked about other things, so I did not get a chance to share this information with you. So because this is a story that we have been following very closely and the progress of it, so I thought it was important for us to just have a touch-up of it as I bring you up to date with the latest in regards to the peace process and the rebuilding process and the mediation process in Ethiopia. So the interim regional administration will be in place until elections are held for the region. The peace deal has resulted in the halt of open conflict and the handover of heavy weapons from Tigray forces to the federal government. The government has resumed essential services to the region and has opened aid corridors. It also dropped its designation of the TPLF as a terrorist designation on Wednesday. All this happened last week after lawmakers approved the decision by a majority vote. Reda, along with other Tigrayan officials, had been charged with terrorism under the designation. The Ethiopian media reports said those charges were expected to be lifted, though they have yet to be formally discontinued. A TPLF spokesperson was not immediately available for comment. The rights groups have accused all sides of committing war crimes during the 2-year war, including the TPLF, Ethiopia's federal government, the Eritrean and regional Amhara forces who fought on the side of the government. So the peace process then, the agreement seems to be going very, very well for the president, for Ethiopia. And even as the right groups continue pushing for accountability, I don't know if that is something that maybe, I don't know if it's the right thing for Ethiopia right now to be talking about accountability and things like that. And if they decide to address the issue of accountability, and what should that essentially, look like? Because I think even as we look out for accountability and justice, I don't know how they're going to go about it, because there are several ways in which they can perhaps implore, or maybe what I see them to be doing right now. And of course the mediation happened, and we've seen that process where we saw other parties coming in and helping in solving this issue. And one of them was the former president of Kenya, President Uhuru Kenyatta, and former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, who are leading the mediators that under the auspices of the African Union. And that process seems to have bore some good fruits, and we are seeing it continuing. But there's also something else that perhaps, and maybe this is what I'm seeing the government of Ethiopia do together with TPLF, and it's just one of the ways in which you can decide to, it's just one means of conflict resolution process, and that is what is called a restorative justice. Now, restorative justice is a process that focuses on repairing the harm caused by the conflict rather than punishing the parties involved. Restorative justice involves bringing the parties together to discuss the impact of the conflict and find a solution that meets the needs of everyone involved. I think this is not in totality, but this is the approach that the government of Ethiopia and perhaps TPLF have decided to take in their conflict resolution and in finding a solution to that conflict. So they don't want to fully go to arbitration. They don't want to fully, maybe that justice looks like going to court and starting maybe a hybrid court or starting all these lengthy legal processes that might mean government will be held accountable and the leadership of the TPLF will be held accountable, and other people who are also involved in this conflict will be held accountable. We saw how Rwanda was able to mediate to get itself out of the, after the 1994 genocide and the, I'm forgetting the name of those courts, or maybe I don't have the words, in a row, but we know how that happened, and people are able to come out and speak freely, and names were named, and Rwanda has truly been able to move on. We can say that. I think we can safely say that at this point, that Rwandese have been able to truly move on, and they're working together. And President Paul Kagame has done a good job in uniting Rwandans, I think. I want to believe that. But they sorted out these issues, and justice was seen to have made. And those who deserved a jail sentence, others are still serving. Other families decided to forgive them and went and spoke on their behalf, and they're removed from prisons. There have been so many other cases. But there are techniques and there are methods to resolve conflict, and a lot of it doesn't always have to mean that somebody has to end up in jail, because you have to assess the situation. Every process, you have to assess the uniqueness of a situation and see, if we took this to the courts, are we going to solve a problem, or are we going to add more problems in the future for the people of Ethiopia? Now, if we created special courts to hear, special maybe localized channels to hear the stories from people, because at the end of the day, as much as the government and the leadership of TPLF are doing this, there are people who are affected. So as much as on the top things seems to be moving smoothly, we have to remember this was not a conflict between two parties. This was a conflict between so many other people, because a lot of people lost their lives, and property in millions of dollars was lost during this conflict. So we have to remember the victims that suffered during this 2-year senseless war, that happened, civil war that happened in Ethiopia. So as much as the government and the TPLF leadership, and now I see that the spokesperson, Getachew Reda, the spokesperson of the TPLF, has been offered this position, which I think is really great, and it shows a goodwill from the government side. It does show a goodwill. It does show a goodwill from the government side to truly find a solution, and everything else that had been agreed upon during that mediation process and the agreement that was signed in November, things seems to be moving well. Immediately after that, TPLF, when the mediation process also continued here in Nairobi, the agreement was for the disarmament to start happening, and I think they gave up all these heavy weapons and all that. In that phase, they're done with it, and now we see the rebuilding of Tigray region has started. So it seems to be working, but I would like to hear the thoughts of the people who suffered. I'd like to hear the idea on what they feel this justice should look like, on what they feel restoration should look like. Because if you don't involve these people in this process, now this is where you are just postponing another conflict. for you to deal with in the future, for the future leadership to have to address. The people must be involved in this process. It cannot be just top leadership of the government, top leadership of the TPLF. The people who suffered the brunt of this conflict, these people must be represented adequately, and their voices must be heard. They must be present in these tables. Their healing depends on how the government handles this process. And maybe taking people to court might not be the ultimate solution here. Because if we start taking people to court, and I can't even believe I'm saying this, then that means, of course, the person who was ordering the forces to go fight, the buck stops with the Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, in the long and short of it. It stops. The leadership of the TPLF stops, the buck stops with them. They were in command, they were in charge, and others. So that might be counterproductive for the prosperity of Ethiopia. So what I've been seeing happen in Ethiopia is what perhaps is just a piecemeal restorative justice, where the process focuses on just repairing the harm caused by the conflict, but rather than punishing the parties involved. And we have been seeing how the government has been focusing on repairing the harm. It has been focusing on restoring the telecommunications facility that were destroyed. It has been focusing on rebuilding the schools and the hospitals and everything else that was destroyed this war. And that is well and good. But there's a part of that rebuilding, there's a part of that repairing that if it's not fully addressed, that is the people who suffered. You build the schools, that is great. The children of the Tigrayans needs to go to school. You build back the hospitals, that is great. You will restore normalcy and other infrastructure that has been destroyed. But the human factor has to be looked at and has to get the most of this focus when you're looking at this repairing, because that is what restorative justice does, where you just focus on repairing the harm that was caused by the conflict, rather than focusing on punishing the parties involved. Okay? So you might find a way, you must, that you have to do. You must find a way to involve the people in this process. So at the end of the day, they understand, I may not get my brother back, I may not get my wife back, I may not get my siblings back who were murdered during this time, but I feel that there is a genuine effort and a remorsefulness from the government or the TPLF or whoever who were involved in this. There is a genuine effort and a remorsefulness that I can be at peace because I can see someone is sorry for what they did. There is a regret over that. So it's a very small thing, but it can help in the healing, because if you just focus on just rebuilding these physical things, these infrastructures and everything else, which is important, period, but you forget the biggest collateral that suffered the brunt of this war, then this is a conflict that we might see play out in the future if these people don't truly heal. The problems you're dealing with in Kenya today, these are just symptoms. These are just symptoms. These are just things that we see play out. But the root causes of these things go way back from when we got independence, way back. These are just symptoms. They're just every now and then you have a headache. Every now and then, your finger is hurting, your head is hurting. But if you don't go for a proper checkup and see what causes these migraines, you'll be surprised. You could be having a heart problem, or you could be having something bigger inside of your body. So these are just symptoms, but the root causes of this goes way back, and nobody has been willing to openly talk about or discuss. President Kenyatta attempted to address some of those injustices, but there are, because there's a section of Kenyans who feel an injustice was met, and they were not even alive when that happened. But because these are stories that were passed on to them, that happened to their great-grandparents, they live to hold the grudges over things that happened when they were not even born yet. So this is what will happen in Ethiopia. If this matter and the restorative justice, because I think this is the process they've chosen to take, which is still okay. It's part of the conflict resolution processes. It's just one of them. There are many other ways, but I think from what we see and how it's playing out, they've chosen this. But we must talk about the people who suffered. That has to be addressed properly, and they must feel that as much as I might not get my house back as it was, as much as I might not get my dead loved one back, but I can have closure now because I can see the government has made an honest effort. I can see the other players have made an honest effort. So now I can have closure and I can heal. So this bitterness is not a story that is told to their children who perhaps lived it today. And then this is a story they'll tell to their children, and it will continue. So it becomes that a generation who grew up with this hate, and this sense of revenge within themselves, so that one day it will just take a very small thing again, and then Ethiopia will resort back to this conflict. So I think that aspect has to be looked at, even as this process moves on well. So I think the appointment of the Tigray People's Liberation Front as the head of the interim administration in the Tigray region, I think it is welcome, because Getachew Reda is a personality that is respected, that truly champions for the cause of the TPLF, and is respected within that community. So I think him being appointed in that position to represent the administration in the Tigray region, I think he'll be, and he's been critical even after that mediation. Remember when Olusegun Obasanjo came up and said, things are resuming well in the Tigray region, and this and that has happened. He came out and said, no, that is not true. That is not true. That is not the case. On the ground, things are different. And so he's not afraid to really speak his mind. But I think after the mediation, he does it in a way that also he factors in the progress that has been made in the mediation and the unity and cohesion. So he's I follow him, so I see what he posts, and I'm keen on because he's been speaking, and he speaks on behalf of the TPLF. So for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to appoint him and place him in this position, I think it's a good move, and that shows the government's commitment to this process. But what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed will not commit to is any form of investigation or any form of actually accountability, because outside of that now it's alternative. But as I've explained there, perhaps restorative justice would be one of the best conflict resolutions strategies that maybe can move Ethiopia forward, because holding people accountable in the way that we know it might not be for the betterment of Ethiopia. I think looking at the factors, all factors standing, I think this could be the right way to move forward for Ethiopia, instead of punishing, because who are you going to punish? Who are you going to punish? Are you going to punish Getachew Reda, the spokesperson of TPLF, who has been given that position? Are you going to punish who? So any form of justice that aims to punish the perpetrators, which at the back of my mind I think they deserve it, but if that was the approach that was to be taken, that might not achieve the intended goal of uniting and rebuilding and having a peaceful Ethiopia. That might be counterproductive because of what is at stake if that approach is taken. So restorative justice is something that is there, but also, as I have taken my time to explain about the human factor of this restorative justice, something needs to be done, and a sort of a platform needs to be created, that seeks to listen and seeks to understand, and just hear the stories of the people of Tigray, and what they went through and what that meant for them, and the government to sit there, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, sit there, listen, be remorseful, apologize on the behalf of the government if you have to, and just on the other side as well, and find a way of healing. You know, healing is very important. In all this, healing is very important. Yeah, you will build nice schools back, you'll build everything, all the infrastructure that was destroyed, that you'll be able to build. But what kind of people are you having around going to these schools? You must just have radicalized a whole generation. So that needs to be looked at, and that needs to be sorted out. But I think so far, this is going on well. And yes, we should keep pushing for accountability in Ethiopia. But accountability should be in a manner that really is alive to the complexities of this conflict in Ethiopia. I think I just sounded there like a security expert. I've studied a bit of that, but that's okay. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. I'm not a security expert. It's just my opinion, on what I think would be the best approach, what I think the government of Ethiopia is doing as far as its implementation of this mediation process and the steps they're taking to move forward, which I think are laudable. And I think it's a good thing that both sides are respected that, and both sides are working together to see a better Ethiopia. But we also have to address the heart, the harm that was caused to the people. That is something that you must find a way, however that might look like for you, to do. But that is for Ethiopians to decide, right? Thank you so much. I'll be back here 3 p.m. East African time for more news items and the latest from across the continent of Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.